Very good. Well, we are back now, Michael, doing this new series that we've been hyping up for all these people. And it is going to be super informational. I think that's a word that we use.
Informational. Educational?
Educational. There we go. Yeah. Because we realize that the whole point of our podcast and putting information out there is so that patients can better understand what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. And in this day and age, when there's so much information coming at you from all different angles, it's really good to get a good foundation, because that way it'll help you realize what's actually true and what's actually false.
Sure. And for me personally, I like to know like what's going on and how things are working.
Right.
Because that helps me understand like why certain recommendations are made and why things work and why they don't. Right. So, I put a lot of time into researching the like biological mechanisms that are going on all the way down to like the nitty gritty stuff, because that just helps me to kind of put all the pieces together and kind of make an illustration or like come up with some sort of analogy that helps me understand it better. But I think that helps other people understand it better too.
Exactly.
To break it down into like really simple terms.
Yeah, exactly. And so this will be essentially our very first series. And this is the one that we'll be starting off with, which is weight loss. Right? Because everybody wants to know how this happens. It's constantly in the news. There's a constant changes, recommendations. You go on Instagram, there's all these products to buy and sell. What we want to do is break it down to the basics, right? And specifically today, what we'll be talking about is energy balance.
Sure.
Right. But in the future, for people that want to know, we'll be talking about things like macros and meal planning, even the mindset of changing and maintaining weight loss. All these things that are really, really important, we're going to go about it one episode at a time so that people better understand what's going on.
Yeah. And so I've put a lot of work into kind of planning out where we're going. And so like you said, we're going to do energy balance today. I think next time we're going to do macronutrients. After that, probably do exercise.
Right.
And I kind of have it structured in two parts. So part one is kind of all of the biological stuff. And then part two would be all of the psychological or behavioral things, why it's difficult to stick to goals, all that kind of stuff. And so it'll kind of be sectioned off so that you kind of know, I want to look about goal setting and making new habits or breaking old habits. That'll be in part two.
Right.
And you can kind of look at each individual topic that you're interested in and kind of go deeper into that. But they are meant to be listened to in order first, because we're going to be building on each thing. So today we're talking about energy balance. You will need to know some of this information when we go into macronutrients and then into exercise. So they all kind of build off of each other. And so the first time, listen to them or watch them in order. And then afterwards, you can go back and listen to whatever so you can get a better grasp on specific topics.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, perfect. Well, then let's get to it. Michael, before we start, I do want to ask you, though, for our listeners that don't know who you are a nutritionist. And the reason you're so passionate about this topic is you actually lost a bunch of weight yourself. So for you, did you have to go to the nitty gritty to understand how to get it done?
No, not necessarily. I did because that's my personality. That's just how I do. But when I first started, I knew nothing and just kind of started with Weight Watchers and lost like 30 pounds on that. And then I hit my first plateau and I had no idea what plateaus were. I was big my whole life. So it's like never tried to lose weight before.
Right.
So I hit a plateau and my mind was like, well, what is happening here? And so that made me look more into it. And so I looked into it enough to kind of understand what I needed to do to see more weight loss and implemented some changes. Right. And then as I continued to hit another plateau and another plateau and another plateau, I just went deeper and deeper and deeper, because it's like, you kind of have to know some stuff. And, that process has not ended yet. I'm still digging and digging and digging and researching and reading. And, it's an obsession kind of with, nutrition. I just want to know everything and help other people do what I was able to do.
Right.
And try to make it easier for them than it was for me. Because it's not that it all came off at once. It took a long time and, there've been ups and downs, which are normal. But I think the experiences I have give me a unique perspective. I kind of understand a lot of the motivational or psychological things that kind of hold you back or prevent people from being successful. So I can kind of help people understand, like, a lot of these things are normal. Like, you're not, if you're having negative self-thoughts or you're downplaying your successes, like, that's normal stuff. Like, everybody does that. It's not just you. You're not weird for, struggling, right? It's not easy for anybody.
Right.
Some people are just, I guess, better equipped for certain aspects of it than others. And we can talk about that in part 2.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's, I love this kind of stuff, and that's why I do what I do.
Awesome. Yeah, it's very good. And again, I think that's helpful for our listeners because, again, what we're telling you is not something we've never done before. We go through these exact same things. We wrestle with the exact same problems. We also struggle with the exact same thoughts of maintaining and keeping and constantly adjusting workouts and nutrition and stuff like that. So again, this is exciting for us because we want you guys to be able to do and experience things that we've also done ourselves. So Michael, let's get into today's episode, which is energy balance.
Sure.
So the reason we decided to go with energy balance first is because this is essentially the crux when it comes to losing weight.
Yes.
So kind of tell me maybe a 30,000 feet overview of why energy balance.
Okay. So basically, energy balance, when we talk about that is in the context of weight loss, it just means kind of the food or the energy that we take in from the foods we eat, and the energy that we use to do whatever it is we're doing. And so energy balance is when both sides of that equation are the same, right? So the energy you bring in is equal to the amount of energy that you put out. And we'll break down the outside of that equation in a little bit. But if those two things are equal, nothing is going to happen. And so with weight loss, you either have to decrease the amount of energy going in or increase the amount of energy going out for weight loss to occur. And so understanding how energy works in that regard makes it a lot easier to understand what changes need to be made and why, and how that affects your ability to lose weight in the long run.
Yeah, perfect. So that's exactly right. So it's in a sense, if you break down weight loss into math, this makes a lot more sense, right?
Sure.
So if energy is coming out, there are certain things that is part of that, and then energy coming in and energy going out, there's other things that we can do to affect that part.
Right.
If they're equal, you won't lose weight. You'll hold still. And for the most part, and we'll talk about this more too, but the body actually likes to stay equal as much as it can. And even from a physiological standpoint, body temperature, we don't like moving that. Body pH, we don't like moving that. Body energy, calories in, calories out. The body does all it can to kind of hold steady.
It likes to be comfortable, and it's comfortable in the known. Right. When you start getting into, outside territory where it's either, below or above, it doesn't like that. It's going to try to steer you back. And that we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, it's always going to try to get back to that safety zone. Yeah,
perfect. So let's start with the energy in then. So for the most part, when we say energy in, I guess the basic is just the food, right? That's the things that we're eating.
Yeah. So we get energy from the foods and the drinks that we, consume. And the way that we measure that energy is in units called calories. So calorie is just a unit of energy that we use to measure how much energy is in food, and drink. So when you say you need 2,000 calories, that just means that's how much energy your body is going to use in a given day. We'll break that down a little bit more, but yeah, so it's just the amount of energy that's in the food and drinks that we consume. And different foods and drinks are going to have different levels of calories based on their composition. That's protein, carbohydrates, fats, alcohol is kind of a fourth one that people don't really consider, and fiber to an extent, but not so much that we're gonna count that one. So just those four contribute calories, and depending on how much of each one of those things is in a particular food is going to determine how many calories are in that food.
Exactly.
And so we're going to talk all about macronutrients because they actually do make a difference in the energy outside of the equation.
Right. Perfect. So yeah, exactly. So this makes sense for a lot of people who are listening. So when they look on the back of a label, they see calories on there. The two things we usually tell people is calories is per serving size. So when you are counting and tracking, which we'll have a whole episode about that, it is important to realize this is only 200 calories in one cookie.
Right.
So if you eat 4, it's not still like 1, you know?
Yeah. My wife bought a bag of brownie, what are they, Muddy Buddies? And I was looking at the label and it was like 140 calories, and it's just a little bag, you know, like the personal bag. And it's like 140 calories, 5.5 servings per bag. And I'm like, why don't they just put how many calories are in the bag and save people the trouble? Because people are going to look at that. And I'm not saying that people are stupid. I'm saying that people are lazy.
Yeah.
We are all lazy. We're going to look at the one number and say, oh, we're good. And we're going to go with that.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to do math and take the extra steps most of the time. And it's a frustration of mine. Just make it simple. Put how many calories are in the package on the package.
Exactly. So for people who are really focused on weight loss, this is where energy in, you do have to keep an eye on that, right? You have to calculate, track, because that makes it easy.
You don't necessarily have to. So a lot of people conflate. So we usually use you might be familiar with the term calories in, calories out. Same thing as energy in, energy out. It's just using the unit, right? A lot of people think that when you say calories in, calories out, you're talking about tracking calories. Right. So you'll hear people say, oh, well, I didn't track my calories and I still lost weight. Great. That's great, because a lot of people don't like tracking. And if you can do it then without tracking, that's great. But you were still in a calorie deficit, and calories in, calories out still mattered. So don't think that you have to track to be in a calorie deficit and see weight loss, but there are definitely there are spaces for that.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well then now, Michael, let's move out to energy out, because energy in makes a lot of sense, which is whatever we put in.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, energy out is what our body needs to burn, right?
Yeah. So energy out, that side of the equation is a little bit more complicated, and we're actually going to expand it out here. Instead of energy out, it's going to be energy used for movement, right? Or work or whatever. Energy used plus energy stored plus energy lost as heat. Because no system is 100% efficient, so you're going to lose a little bit of energy in heat. But that's not large enough to really worry about in our conversation. So we're just going to cut that one off and focus on energy used and energy stored. And so now our equation looks like energy in equals energy used plus energy stored. And so the total energy that we use, so that energy outside of the equation, is basically, we use the term metabolism to describe that. The other word, or the other term we use, is total daily energy expenditure. So TDEE. So 100% of the calories that your body uses in a day is TDEE. And that can be broken down into 4 parts. And I'm going to pull up my notes just to make sure I'm, giving the right percentages here, because they vary depending on what source you're using. But so the 4 things that TDEE gets broken into, the first one is resting metabolic rate. So resting metabolic rate is the amount of energy required to basically just keep you alive. It's for stuff like breathing, stuff like keeping your internal organs working, keeping your blood flowing, heart pumping, all that kind of stuff. Like just the basics, right? No additional movement, no additional, nothing, just that.
Correct.
Keeping the lights on, as Lane Norton would say.
Yep.
And that's about 60% of your total daily energy expenditure. And so just keeping things working is about 60%. That's the majority, right? Yep. And things that contribute to resting metabolic rate, or RMR, are age, gender, and body composition. So body composition being, how much muscle do you have versus how much fat do you have? If you have more muscle, your energy expenditure is going to be higher, because it costs more energy to sustain that muscle.
Right.
And that's why there are differences in gender, because for the most part, men typically have more muscle than women. So their energy needs are a little bit higher. And so the only one there that is really, really modifiable is body composition.
Right.
And so you have some control over, how much lean muscle you have, how much fat mass you have, and that can contribute to your resting metabolic rate. So it can have a pretty significant impact on that daily energy expenditure.
As you're pulling out the next one, that might make sense why a lot of times men and women, you'll hear them, right? They both get on the same kind of diet, and men seem to lose weight a lot faster than women. They get super frustrated, but it's probably that.
Yeah, and it is super frustrating, and it is just kind of the reality of it. It's just differences, right? And that's one of the important reasons that it's not a good idea to compare your success to another person's. Even like a man comparing his success to another man, you just live different lives,
right?
Your body compositions are not going to be exactly the same. Your height and weight's not going to be the same. So your calorie needs are almost guaranteed to be different. But then between men and women, it's just different. And women have a lot of other hormonal things that go on that make weight loss a little bit more challenging. So that still doesn't negate the energy balance thing. Like that still works. It's still a thing. It's just a little bit more complicated than it is for men sometimes.
Yeah.
So the second one is the thermic effect of food. So TEF, and that is just the amount of energy used to eat, digest, absorb, transport, and store nutrients, right? And so there is a little bit of modification that you can make to thermic effect of food. So the types of foods that you eat require differing amounts of energy to process, right? So protein typically is more costly to digest than fats. So I think we'll touch more on that in the next episode, but just to give you an idea, about 30% of the energy you get from protein is what you use to process that protein. So if you consume 100 calories of protein, the net absorbed is going to be about 70. Whereas with fat, it's about 2%, 2 to 3%. So if you consume 100 calories from fat, you're going to process about 97 of that. And so we'll talk about that a little bit longer. So diet composition does make a difference there. Also, level of processing in the foods you eat changes that as well. So the more processed a food is, the less energy you need to use to break it down and absorb it and everything. Right. So highly processed foods typically contribute more calories than whole foods.
That makes sense. Yeah. So people need to pay attention, because next episode, when we break this down, this will make it more apparent why we recommend certain types of food versus highly processed food, which is why the standard American diet is not usually the greatest for weight loss. Right.
So, and then the third one is exercise activity thermogenesis, or EAT. It's the amount of energy we need, or the amount of energy we burn exercising. Surprisingly, it's not that much.
Right.
So resting metabolic rate is about 60%. Exercise activity for most people is about 5%, upwards of 10% at the high end. Now that is, going to be higher or lower depending on your levels of exercise. If you don't exercise at all, that's 0%. If you spend all day every day, and you're Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, like working out all day every day to look like that, it's probably higher than 10%. But for the most part, it's going to fall between 5 and 10%. And so exercise is kind of any intentional additional movement with the intent of either burning extra calories or building muscle or improving your metabolic health. And we have a whole episode on exercise specifically for weight loss coming up, and we'll talk a lot more about that.
Perfect.
But what you should take away here is that most people are not going to exercise enough to make exercise the primary driver of the caloric deficit that leads to weight loss, because it just doesn't contribute that much. So when we talk about, what matters most, for most people, it's going to come from diet. So we're going to spend time talking about that.
And that makes sense. Again, diet, exercise only accounts for about 5% of the out. Diet is 100% of the in.
Yes.
So it's much easier to adjust the food versus the exercise when it comes strictly to weight loss itself.
Yeah. Well, let's look at some easy numbers. If the average amount of calories burned walking a mile is about 100, and you take a Snickers bar that's 200 calories, it takes you like 13 seconds or less to eat a Snickers bar, depending on, how hungry you are. But it takes, if you're walking a fairly good pace, 3 miles per hour, it's going to take you about an hour to walk 2 miles. So you can take an hour out of your day to walk and burn off that Snickers bar, or you can just not eat the Snickers bar.
Yes.
So the time investment is 13 seconds versus an hour. And most people are going to benefit more from just not eating the candy bar than they are from trying to break even by walking for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Or
Dang.
or for an hour, I
Makes
guess.
sense. Yeah. Well, then, Michael, let's move on then.
Okay.
3 energy scenarios. So now we've talked about energy in, energy out. There's essentially 3 scenarios that can happen when it comes to balancing these energies.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about them already, but we'll kind of summarize them here. One of them is the energy deficit, right? So energy deficit means the energy inside of the equation is lower than the energy outside of the equation. And so when you're bringing in less energy than you are burning, you're going to lose weight.
Right.
And we kind of didn't talk about this, but I kind of want to talk about it now because it's on my mind.
Yes,
But
talk about that.
the way that it all works is governed by the laws of physics, right? So you have the first law of thermodynamics. It just says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can change form from one to another, but it's always going to be the same. And so that just means that 100% of the energy that you take in is going to be used, stored, whatever. None of it's just going to magically disappear or just, it's going to be there in some form or fashion, and it's all accounted for.
Right.
The second law is the law of entropy, which is basically this state of stasis almost, where things are not moving. And the best way that I can explain that is understand that heat always moves from areas of hot to areas of cold. In normal natural circumstances without additional energy being put into the system, right? And so if you take like a glass of ice water and you put it in on your counter and just leave it, the heat in the air in the room is going to transfer into that cold glass until they both reach the same temperature, at which point the heat stops moving, everything's at room temperature, right? So minute levels of differences in temperature in the air are going to go into the glass. And so the temperature in the room is going to drop a little bit. The temperature in the glass is going to raise until they're equal. And so with energy in and energy out, the body does the same thing. So if you increase the energy coming in, your body is going to do one of 2 things. It's going to either move more to burn more energy, or it's going to increase its storage capacity for energy, which means gain weight, right? So that's where the energy surplus is. If you're bringing more energy in, you either need to burn it all off or you're going to store it as fat. And 100% of it's going to come to a balance at some point.
Right.
And so that balance is just where each side is the same. And so in the same sense, if you decrease the amount of energy coming in, the body is either going to move less or it's going to reduce its storage capacity until the amount of energy is equal, right? So just like that temperature in the room and the glass, they're going to shift until they're the same.
Right.
So your energy in your body is going to work that way. So if you have a deficit, you're going to lose weight. If it's the same, weight loss is going to stop. You're going to stay. If it's more, you're going to gain weight.
Right.
Your body's always going to be searching for that equilibrium.
And this makes a lot of sense because, for a lot of people, so again, this is, I guess, time to put it in. These things take time, right? So none of this is super fast, meaning like just because you ate a 2,000 calorie cake today doesn't mean tomorrow you gain 2 pounds instantly.
Right.
Because the body, again, it will try to raise its metabolism. It'll try to do something to try to even itself out.
Yeah. There's a lot of mechanisms that the body has to deal with like short-term things. And when we're talking about weight loss, we're not talking about like the one day, right? One day is not going to make or break anything. It's the consistency over time that really matters. So, whatever it is that you're doing, you need to be consistent with it over time. And that's what leads to, weight gain or weight loss.
Exactly. Well, again, I think as we see throughout the theme and as we talk about these episodes on weight loss, you'll see that one of the key words is consistency, right? Because again, whatever you do consistently is what the body will end up adapting. But this also explains plateaus, like when people are trying to lose, while all of a sudden they plateau. Even on the new miracle weight loss shots, people are plateauing over and over. And it's like I said, you can restrict, but the body sooner or later doesn't want to die. So it'll find a way to try to balance it again.
Yeah. And I have a whole episode on the body's natural defense mechanisms against weight loss. I'm still trying to decide how much I want to put into that episode, but basically it'll be why weight loss is hard. Because on paper, we're putting these equations out there. We're explaining the energy and stuff. On paper, it's very simple, know. But in practice, there is a whole lot more going on that makes it more difficult. And so that's kind of one of the points is we're trying to break those things down so you understand what's going on so that you can then counter it.
Yeah.
We can't fight the enemy we don't know.
That's right. That's perfect. Well, Michael, what do you still have something?
I still have a couple things that I wanted to talk about because we talked about, your total daily energy expenditure, right? So figuring out how many calories you need to eat. So the way that we determine how many calories a person needs, there are a few ways to do it directly. One of them is the same way that we measure how many calories are in food that we eat, right? So when we're in a food laboratory and we're trying to measure how many calories are in a Twinkie, the way that they do that, the equipment they use is called a bomb calorimeter. So they put the Twinkie in this chamber and they set it on fire until it's completely burned up. And they measure the heat output and say, well, that's how many calories it has.
Interesting.
Well, we can't do that with living humans.
Right.
Because that isn't conducive to life.
Right.
And so that's not an option. The other one is they can take two chambers that are extremely temperature controlled and put you inside the middle one, the inside chamber, and make you lay on a table completely flat. You haven't eaten for like however many hours. You're not allowed to go to sleep. You're not allowed to move. You just have to lay there. And it's super strict. And then they measure the temperature that you put into the middle room that changes the temperature in the outer. And they basically measure the heat exchange between your body, the middle chamber, and the outer chamber. 99.99% of human beings are never going to do that.
Right.
Because it's nearly impossible to be super accurate with that, and nobody has time for that. And so the best that we can do for most people is use these mathematical formulas or energy equations, right? And they get fairly close. But the problem that a lot of people run into is they'll use, I'm going to say I use MyFitnessPal for calorie tracking, weight tracking, all that kind of stuff. And if you put in your height, weight, your gender, your age, all that kind of stuff, it will give you a number, like a calorie number. That is an estimate. It's the same estimate. It's using the same equations that we would use to calculate energy needs, right? But that's as good as it gets as an estimate. And the only way to know if it's correct or not is to eat that many calories and see what happens. And because we know what happens in a deficit or in a surplus or imbalance, if you consume that many calories and you lose weight, you're in a deficit.
Right.
If you consume that many calories and you gain weight, you're in a surplus. If you consume that many calories and nothing happens, that's your total daily energy expenditure, essentially. And I'm not talking about like one day again. This is, weeks, months at a time. And so the mistake that people make is they'll download the app and they'll put in their stuff and it'll tell them this is your energy needs. Well, there may be a lot of different reasons why theirs is lower than that. And they may follow it to a T and not lose weight. That doesn't mean that calorie or energy in, energy out is wrong. It just means that the equation used to calculate your energy needs wasn't accurate for you. And so you need to play with it and figure out where that number is. And I have an episode planned for tracking.
Okay.
And so we can talk about that too. But it's a good idea to kind of know what the real number is so that you can have an idea of what do I need to do on the energy inside of that equation to actually start making a difference. But you don't have to track to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so figuring out your energy needs, it's all estimations. So
perfect. So again, I think with, as we're wrapping up this episode, how to lose weight. The first step is, like you said, figuring out the energy in, right? And so MyFitnessPal, there's a lot of apps out there, but they're all just estimates. So your body, and this is a part of medicine, it's very personalized. So everybody's body is a little different. There is some experimentation going on. So like I said, you put it in it, if it calculates what your metabolism is supposed to be, but you eat more than that and you don't gain weight, then maybe your body's burning more. If you eat less than that and you don't lose weight, maybe your body's burning less. So there is some trial and error going on there.
Yeah. And the other thing is it doesn't take into account body composition either.
Correct.
So it doesn't ask you in those equations, like I don't think Some of them might, but most of them don't. The most widely used ones don't take body composition. So if you have a significant amount of muscle, those equations are not going to work.
Right.
If you have like no muscle at all, those equations are not going to, they're not going to work.
Right.
I mean, they'll work, but they're going to be significantly more inaccurate than for most people. And so I guess to break it down into a one sentence, how do you lose weight on paper? Consuming fewer calories than your body needs consistently over a long period of time.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, and again, Michael, as we are finishing this episode, when it comes to weight loss, the most important thing based on today's episode is the deficit, right? So you've got to be able to get below whatever your body is needing to survive. Yes.
Yeah. And so I may have a little presentation in the show notes that will kind of give you the visual representation of this. And we're going to be updating it as we go. But basically the prioritization hierarchy that we're going to be working with is for weight loss, the number one most important thing is getting into an energy deficit. And for now, the other most important thing is consistency. And so if you can be in a caloric deficit or an energy deficit consistently, you will lose weight. And so we're going to build on that. It's going to be more than just those two. And at a certain point, those two may shift.
Right.
But not right now.
Perfect. Well, yeah. And again, the beauty of these episodes is we're coming at them pretty much once a week. And again, in the beginning, like you said, too, we want to listen to these in order.
Yes.
So we want you to understand this because everything else builds off this equation so that if we say things, and you'll understand like, oh, the reason we're doing this is because it affects either the in or the out.
Yes.
So perfect. Well, any closing thoughts that you have, Michael?
Just that this may be the second time we recorded this episode. And right. I did want to make a comment on that. We recorded this episode like 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I didn't feel great about it because I felt like we left some things out and we didn't do the best job of explaining the intent of the series. And I care about doing it right and about helping to guide people in the right ways. And so we just decided we're going to re-record it and go.
Yes.
And do it right because that's what we want to do. We want to do this right and we want to make sure that it's good and we want to make sure that, it's up to the standards that we would want our patients and our clients to consume.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so if you have any questions, if you're watching this, you're like, I don't understand this, I want more, feel free to send us a message, put it in the comments. I'm sure if you're thinking of it, multiple people are thinking it, and we will do our best to answer, but definitely don't miss the next one because we get into more detail.
Yeah, I would actually love to do an episode where we do, questions and answers, where we take questions from, I don't know what feedback mechanisms you have in place or we have in place for getting questions from people, but I would love to do an episode where we just take user questions or listener questions and just go break them down.
Yeah.
Like, that would be really fun.
That would be awesome. So, all right. Well, Michael, thanks for this episode. We'll be putting it on. It should be this Friday, and then we will go on every single Friday. Thanks, Michael.
Not a problem.